Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your Invigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to Ruminating with RealAg, the podcast that chews on the latest in beef production, with your host, Amber Bell.
I'm Amber Bell, and this is Ruminating with RealAg. For today's episode, I am absolutely privileged to have Kevin Elmy of Cover Crops Canada joining me. Now, he just got back from a trip to the Ukraine, where he was talking about cover crops with different growers and producers. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about the differences between the Ukraine and Canada, but we're also going to be speaking about what cover crops going into the fall look like. So what can be seeded before it frees up, what the value is in having something seeded even going into September, and just the wide gamut of what it looks like to grow cover crops. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Kevin. It is wonderful to see you again.
Awesome to be chatting with you again. Missed our chats in the past.
Right. So you just got back from a trip from Ukraine. Let's start there. What was that like?
It was really interesting. World Rebuilding Rural Ukraine and Travel Light Agro, they asked if I'd be interested. Jill Clapperton put my name forward as a potential person to go out and talk about the application of cover crops in Ukrainian agricultural management systems.
What were some of the differences that you saw out there? I'd imagine like it's a completely different environment, right?
Well, that's what I thought. And then when one of the maps that I pulled out, and I took Ukraine from Europe, and it was transposed over Western Canada, and it basically runs from Calgary to Brandon, from Prince Albert down to Bismarck, North Dakota. So
that's a large space.
It's a relatively large space, and it drops in right about where we're at. So with the crops that we're growing were very similar, a lot more corn, a lot more soybeans, the sugar beets, winter rapeseed, winter cereals were the main crops that we saw. Very little perennial forages because they really don't have a beef industry. The farms that we did visit, they were all very large corporate farms. But as we're driving through the countryside, you can still see the small family farms scattered through the as we're driving.
And what did cover crop integration look like out there?
There was, the fields that we saw, 1 out of 28 had a cover crop previously, and we could really tell with the soil aggregation, the soil health, just the way the smell of the soil. So. And those were, once again, these large corporate farms that were looking at doing some change. I was being coached by one of my friends, Dr. Luda Sharma she's from South Carolina, but originally from the Odessa area. And so she was telling me and introducing me to some of the producers over there that were using cover crops and building soil health, doing these really innovative things. Still producing corn and soybeans, but doing intercropping, having the cover crops, and basically taking the synthetics right out of their production system, and once again just driving the economics, the soil health, everything they were doing was a definite win.
And without the cattle herd, what differences did you see that makes? Because I mean, we're in Alberta, but of course the prairies in general have quite a few cows on the landscape.
I always tell people when we start talking about cover cropping, having the livestock utilization of the cover crop makes the economics a lot more dramatic from the standpoint we have utilization of what we're growing, having that go through an animal, and whether it's custom grazing like I used to do on the farm or if it's your own herd, there's so many different benefits. So when we throw the cover crops in, number one, this time of year, so it's I don't even know the date, at the end of August. Clayton Robbins, he's done his Nuffield scholarship, and one of the things they found was if we can be resting our perennials, as the 6 to 8 weeks before freeze up, if we're not cutting it or grazing these perennials, they're able to put a lot of energy and food stock into the roots, so that this way they're going to overwinter better. They're going to be growing more vigorous in the spring. So anytime we cut or graze, forcing those plants to regrow, they're using those energy resources from their root system. So using these cover crops this time of year, so if we're just a grain farmer and or have this cropping ground that we're able to get the crop off and have a green cover crop growing underneath it, to kick those cows out onto that this time of year. So the plants are, when we get out of these 30 and 32 degree days, we're going to have quite vigorous growth, and we're going to be capturing sunlight. We're going to be, putting those root exudates into the ground. We're going to be really producing some high brix plants that animals can go out and graze. Whereas our perennials this time of year, they're shutting down, they're maturing, they're trying to, get ready for next year. So those bricks of those plants start dropping. And so if someone's not familiar with what bricks is, it's just a measure of the photosynthetic activity of that plant reflected in the sap, the things diluted in solution in the sap. So basically, we always relate it back to sugars, but there's proteins and oils and everything else. So when we have this high brix, the animals will consume more of high quality of food, which is going to put more condition on those animals, which, this time of year, we want to build up the condition of the animals so that when winter does come, they're in good shape to be able to take our Canadian winters.
So really that mixed farming system is ideal, because then you could have cover crops under your actual cash crops, and you also get to rest pastures.
Absolutely. And this is, once again, as a grain farmer, for me, I never owned a grazing animal on the farm. I was borrowing them, and in return, the people that I was working with, they would give me a check for the days of grazing out there, and in most cases, they would come back and either give me a bonus because the animals were in such good shape, and then from a grain farmer, I was able to go in and do my cropping on that ground and not need to require a lot of synthetic inputs on it. Never mind the fact that, okay, so I got a crop off of that during the summer. Now during the winter, I'm still generating income off it because I have animals out there, and I'm getting days of grazing that whoever I'm working with, my partner, is paying me to do that.
Right, so that works on the crop side of things. What does the ROI look like on the cattle side? Or let's say you own both operations, right? Your cash crop, but you're also running cattle.
So then, once again, it's if we can go in and start reducing the dollars that we're investing in that cash crop, that's money that stays in our pocket. So that's always a positive. Never mind the fact that, okay, so now we're resting our perennial pastures, and those perennial pastures are going to be more vigorous in the spring. We can have cover crops that will overwinter. So instead of, rushing those pastures, the perennial pastures in the spring, we can be sacrificing these biennial crops that have overwintered or greening up in the spring. We know we're going to be terminating them, whether we're seeding another cover crop or cash cropping into it. We can abuse those, get those pastures up and strong, so that this way we get more resilient pastures and hay crops through, and whether we get drought, whether we have flooding or whatever challenges we get in agriculture.
They can handle it. And so I had the experience of getting to go and see a canola crop that was actually underseeded with red clover. Are you seeing more of that? And are there certain cash crops that work better in a cover cropping system?
If you go out and look at a natural system, and whether it's prairie, if it's forest, if it's whatever we're looking at, we never see monocultures. Whenever we see monocultures, guess what? We see weeds. When we see weeds, then we want to go and spray it, and we reduce it back to a monoculture system. And then when we start relying more and more on chemistry, our bricks of our crops start going down, which means we're going to get more disease, we're going to get more it's not a natural system, and we're trying to prop it up using technology and synthetics. So when we are looking at developing a cropping system, and once again, I always work with these triangles. And so in this triangle, it's grasses, it's broadleaf, and it's legumes. So the Native American people, when they were doing agriculture, they were dealing with the three sisters. So maize, which corn, beans, and melons. So these are the things that when I'm developing cover crop blends, whether it is for grazing or for cash crops or whatever, these are the things that I'm trying to create this triangle. And we have to take a look at the last crop, we have to look at the next crop, and we have to look at this crop. How do we, add species in to make the system work? And so when we are looking at annual cropping systems, when we're dealing with the spring seeded, cool season crops that we normally grow, our root exudates only get released for about 30 days of the year. And when the plant then puts up a stalk, now those root exudates drop off dramatically because that plant needs all that carbon to produce the stem, the leaves, the seeds, flowers. So what we need to do is have a plant in that vegetative stage for as many days as possible.
Right.
So one of the things that we've been using is in the wetter areas, using something like Italian ryegrass. We can use festioliums. We can use perennial ryegrass. We have options on the fine seeded stuff. When we start looking at the drier areas, we need a little bigger seeds. So I go to the winter triticale and winter wheat. So when we're seeding our wheat, barley, oats, we put down this biennial grass. It's going to stay vegetative through the whole growing season, and we don't have to change our management. So this way we have that vegetative crop. Most of those will overwinter, so that next we either terminate it, as late as we can in that fall, or we let it overwinter and terminate it in the spring. Once again, do we have cows? Do we not have cows? What are the things that we're dealing with in our system? The biggest thing is when we have cover crops that overwinter, we want to make sure that we are managing our soil moisture. Mm-hmm. So if we are down at 7 persons, dry land, and the snow is gone in, pick your date, in March, hopefully it's later than March, but if the snow is gone and it's dry, as soon as we can, go out and terminate that cover crop, unless we're planning on doing some grazing. Because if we have limited soil moisture and we allow that to overwinter and continue growing, that's going to be soaking up that soil moisture, and we're going to be drying out that profile. We have built soil aggregates, we have the roots in there, we have the mycorrhizae fungi, we have all the positive, but if we have no water, it's really tough to grow crops. Mm-hmm. So we really have to manage that water. On the flip side, in the years of 2010 to 2014 in the Yorkton area, we were averaging about 40 inches of rain, which normally we get about 8. So having these overwintering cover crops actually saved my hide more than once, because the plant was growing, it was using that excess water, and I was able to get in and scratch in some crops where I could. So on the wet too dry, we have to manage it. And on the too wet, we have to manage it. It's different goals of what we want to do.
Which is interesting, because we often hear like every farm is different, and I guess that's a big thing, right? I've heard different things. Actually, that's the first time that I've really heard about the different soil moisture and managing the cover crop for the different soil moisture, because usually what you hear is, well, it helps with soil moisture, which it does in some scenarios.
And this is where, when we're talking about extremes, when we're talking about average, it's easy. It's, you terminate it, and you want to, if it gets too mature, too stemmy, when we terminate in the spring, then there's a nitrogen tie up, there's this, there's that, but they're all manageable within our system of production. And these are the things that we'd be looking at. And what the other thing is, when we start talking about livestock, and if it is a full season cover crop that we're going to be using as a feed source, if we have something overwintering, that's cow chow. Right. So I always say, why terminate unless it's dry, unless it isn't something we want to be feeding, unless there's some reason. Having living plants in there, that's always a good thing. How
long do you think it normally takes a producer to sort of perfect perfect or come close to perfecting their management of it? Because I mean, it's much like grazing, right? Each year it changes. You need to change it up. You need to really get to know your land base. So how long do you think it takes a grower to figure that out, and how sensitive are the cover crops?
Perfection is a lifetime, and you're still not going to get there. When it gets to something where we have something that's functional, that is resilient for our system, we learn that fairly quickly, because when we have a cover crop, kind of like what's in the background here, when you look at that, what's wrong with it? Depending on what your goals are. So as our goals change, our cover crop will change. But this is when when I'm doing up blends, rarely will I have the same blend for the same person, the same ground, the same 2 years in a row, because it's going to be, as our soils start in succession, and we start building mycorrhizal fungi, we get our fungal bacteria ratio up over that 0.3. Now our weeds disappear. Now we don't need to, we're taking our ideas away from we need to control these weeds to, the weeds are we have the replacements in our cover crop blend, so the weeds aren't expressing themselves. We have these things happening in the system. Okay, now we can start actually working with the plants that we want to meet the goals that we want. And so in the blend that I have behind me, what I did was, the year before, it was a soybean crop that we harvested for seed. We then direct seeded this high legume mix with a little bit of pearl millet, with a little bit of phacelia, and underseeded to perennial ryegrass. So I was going to grow perennial ryegrass for seed without having to buy nitrogen. And so I went in with a high legume mix, a little bit of warm season grass, a little bit of forb, and that was what my goal was. If I was going to be going to winter triticale, what I would do there is have more Japanese millet, some crown millet, along with some legumes still to fix some nitrogen, still have some forbs in there. But now I've switched over to a high warm season mix, knowing that I was going to go into a biennial cool season grass crop.
Right.
And then that next year, then add more. So it's always evolving. And as soon as we start getting patterns in our production and we become predictable, nature then starts looking for potentially weeds, or just, if we went in and went with a high legume mix, and we're going to be grazing it, we're going to be bale grazing on it, we're going to be building the nitrogen in our soil, and we keep going with that high legume mix, what's going to happen is those legumes now lose their ecological advantage, because they're not there to build nitrogen anymore. Mycorrhizae is doing fine because of them, but more grasses are going to be creeping in because of our carbon nitrogen ratio, because of our fungal bacteria ratio. The soil's changing. And unless we want to cap out our soil succession, we need to change our plans. We need to shock the system. And once again, when you look at nature, when we look at the energy, and so, when we have a hay stand, that'd be probably the easiest example. So the first year we establish it, our energy is going up. Year 2, year 3, we get really good production. In year 4, year 5, it starts dropping off again, because we're managing it the same way. We're not shocking the system. If we go out and we take a cut, and then we do some grazing after that cut, so take an early cut at the end of June, do some grazing in July, or do some dormant grazing after it freezes up and the plants go dormant, now we're shocking the system.
Right.
These are the things. So instead of having that production starting to drop, now we're shocking it and it's going back up again. And so it's kind of, we want to maintain this ebb and flow type of system. And
so when producers are choosing species or mixtures for a cattle system, and you try and work into the process, how difficult is it, and how do you balance the need for feed value with your soil health benefits? And of course, if they're going in spraying, that's a whole other ball game, right? To try and figure out what plants are going to be able to resist sprays.
And that is exactly it. And so when we go through, one of the first questions I asked is, number one, what is your goal? What are you feeding? When are you feeding? how are you going to manage these plants? And when we look at that, okay, so we get the plan of what our goals are. Then what we want to do is what weeds are growing. I have wild oats, I have cleavers, I have Canadian thistle, I have dandelion. And When Weeds Talk by J.L. McCammon should be in every farm office.
Wait, what was that book name?
When Weeds Talk.
Okay.
J.L. McCammon.
Cool.
And it's a nice, simple little book. It's a little do-a-tank. When Daryl Chubb first introduced it to me, it was $20. Now, because of printing costs, because of everything else, it's now, I think, $66 through Acres USA.
Cool.
So every once in a while it go on sale. So this way you can get a bit of a deal. But it's a great book of explaining what triggers these weeds to grow. These weeds aren't here just to drive us crazy or give us this haircut. They're doing ecological service. And so if we look at something like wild oats, how long have we been fighting wild oats? 120 years in Western Canada. You go to Europe and it's been 200-300 years or 400. I don't even know how long wild oats have been over in Europe. So, but when we look at it, and so we go back to that hay scenario. So we'll seed a nurse crop along with our perennial forage, and we do that because we're going to have every weed that has potentially grow on the farm going to grow in with that forage establishment because we're not going to spray it. So we have this nurse crop, we cut it off, we bale it up, and there's going to be a good portion of wild oats in that mix. So we feed it out, we cut it before they go to seed, hopefully, so that this way we're not going to perpetuate the seed bank, but we're going to cut it, we're going to bale it. In year 2, when that forage crop then overwinters, that next year, what do we see for wild oats? Maybe in the water draws, maybe in the low spots, but basically fairly clean. Year 3, what do we see for wild oats? As long as there wasn't erosion, as long as we have a good establishment, we don't see any wild oats. Year 4, we don't see any wild oats. But when we look at the production cycle and it starts dropping again, what do? Most of the time we don't know how to shock it properly. So because productivity starts dropping, then we start ripping it up and go back to cropping. Historically, what most people will do is seed oats on their hay breaking because there's no wild oats. They're clean. They don't need a lot of inputs. You can make some good money growing oats. But as we do tillage, as we do fertilizer, as we do fungicide, what happens is our fungal bacteria ratio, when we first start and we seed that cover crop or that perennial forage, we're in that 0.2. Most of the farming land, whenever we see wild oats, it's under 0.3 fungal bacteria. So this is pound for pound in the soil. As we see that forage crop with that nurse crop, in year 2, it goes up to that 0.3, maybe 0.35. So then the wild oats start disappearing. As it goes 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, and then it tips over and it goes over the 1-to-1 fungal to bacterial. So then, because the forages, as they start maturing, they release less and less root exudate, which then drops our bacteria populations in the soil. And the bacteria will cycle nutrients to release to feed that perennial stand. So our productivity starts dropping. So we break it up. We damage our fungi. We produce more bacteria in the soil. It releases nutrients. But because we're at that, when we do tillage, maybe we're going to drop our fungal bacteria ratio by 0.2 every time we do it. When we fertilize, it's going to be dropping more. And so we'll have, that will be that 1-to-1 when we first start growing oats. We do some tillage. Now we're at 0.9. We add fertilizer. We're at 0.75. We're still above that 0.3. But after 3 or 4 years, once we drop below that 0.3, wild oats start showing up again.
Right.
So it's interesting from the standpoint of understanding how and why these nutrient cycles happen and how it's related. And once again, when we look at the doing testing on the fungal bacteria ratio, we can get the Chinook Applied Research Association will tell you your fungal bacteria ratio, but that's a snapshot in time. What we have to do is look at landform. And when we look at landform, then we get a really good idea of where we're at from the standpoint of that fungal bacteria ratio on an average through the year. So that when we have these pastures and we start getting rosebush starting to show up, we see silver willow starting to show up. When we start seeing the shrubs, that's an indication that we're over that 1-to-1. Prior to that, we don't have it. So it's interesting to see how, when we know that we're fungal dominant in that soil, how do we balance that again? And so we need more bacteria. And so how do we get that bacteria? We need to shock the system.
Interesting. And how complicated do you think, like, if you were to break it down to very simple terms so that the farmer or rancher, the average one that honestly is probably not going to spend a whole lot of time focused on learning all this. I also know the farmers and ranchers that completely nerd out on this stuff. But for the average one that doesn't want to nerd out, they just want to go and make it work and they want to run their cattle. What are some of the really simple things that they can do to sort of get things moving in the direction they want it to without necessarily having to rip up pastures?
And that's going back to management. So if we have a pasture that we've seeded down and it's become non-productive, and they say, okay, no, that blend didn't work, I need a different blend. Guess what? It doesn't matter what species we have per se. It's our management that drives the soils this way. So one of the things, on Monday, I just finished up, there was 30 Australian graziers that came over for 2 weeks. So there's a good chunk of them flew home yesterday. And one of the things I always told them as we're driving is the biggest deficiency we have in grazing systems is cross fencing. And so these, whether it's daily moves, every 2-day moves, whatever, we need to manage our grass better. And when, the great thing with these graziers is, once again, they're thinking as a grazier, not a cattle rancher. So they're using their cattle or sheep as a tool to manage the grass. The grass is their primary focus. And when we look at, a lot of traditional grazing practices here is there's a quarter section of land, and I know that I can put 30 cows out there and they're going to be fine until fall. Yes, they are. But if we're looking at truly managing grass, that's not the way to be doing it. So there's, improved grazing management systems. And once again, if you start getting into, the sand hills and some of the places where, rain is limiting, it is a challenge. But there's some really good experience out there in very brittle, dry areas that they're increasing their management on those type of landforms.
Right. We've talked about the cash crop side of things, but what about seeding into those perennial pastures? And what are some, I've heard of people trying drone seeding, doing, air seeding, kind of everything. What have you experienced with that? And are there any varieties that you're like, yeah, this usually will do really well?
So that's one of the things that a lot of people are looking at of, how do we get more diversity in? How do we get end fixers? How do we? And the biggest thing, the first question is, how sod bound is it? If it's like a lawn where there's no room to add more plants, we have to think of a way to go in and create space for more diversity. So in Australia, there's a company called the Soil Key. And maybe not practical in a lot of cases of Western Canada because of just sheer acres, because of these machines are, I think, 8 to 12 feet wide. So to do a quarter section will take a bit of time. But what it is a glorified rototiller on wide rows. So it'll rip up about a 3 or 4 inch strip. So it'll destroy the vegetation there, but it has a seeder on it to be able to seed this diversity into it. So that this way we get rid of that competition, gives us an opportunity to seed something that we want to add to it, gives it an opportunity. So rock's not a great thing. Sand, we need water. So there's some limitations. But Western Australia, guess what? Very, very, very similar. So we're going to have to be picking our times when we're going to be doing it. So we may not do it, this spring was a little on the dry side, probably wouldn't have worked. Once it started raining, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity to go out and do it then. So the sod bound is the first limitation. The next one is, rock is going to be the next one. So some of these paddocks are seeded down because they're just too rocky to try and farm. So how do you get around that? So if we have some bare ground and we have the management available, there is the opportunity of doing a broadcast of seed, making these small paddocks. So this way we're getting really good animal impact of hoof action. Broadcast the seed, come in, graze it really intensely for a day, 2 days, 6 hours, whatever your system is, and then move them on to the next paddock. So when you look at what nature's doing, this is what nature does. Grows a plant all season. The seed head is up into the fall during the winter. It shatters out, goes on the ground, or gets eaten and passes through the rumen, gets dropped down. The hoof action then seeds it into the soil, the right depth, and if nothing else, it sits dormant in the soil, waiting for the conditions to be right. When I was in New South Wales, I had a tour with one producer at Dunedoo, and he said, we were driving through one of his paddocks, and he said, "So what do you think of the red clover in this mix?" And I said, "Well, it's a little thick." And he said, "Well, it should be, because 6 years ago, went out and seeded red clover into his perennial stand, and it was a dry year, nothing germinated." So he said, "Okay, maybe it germinated and died." So next year he went out and seeded another full rate of red clover into it. Same thing, dry, didn't germinate. So he said, "Okay, well, that done with that project." And the year I was there, it rained. And so they had 2 years of red clover that came up into the stand. And once again, nature's intelligence. She's not going to, go out and allow things to grow if conditions are not right.
Right.
And that's the same thing. If we're looking at native grasses need to be, in most cases, over a 0.6 fungal bacteria ratio. Sisal milkvetch, another great example. You seed Sisal milkvetch into fresh stand, it's not going to show up for 3 or 4 years. And when it does, that's an indication that we're over 0.5 fungal bacteria, because that is when Sisal milkvetch wants to grow.
I have to say, Sisal milkvetch is probably one of my favorite plants, just because of the rattle factor. That's all it takes. It makes me very happy to see it out in my fields. So speaking of that, Keek, we're coming into fall here. Harvest it's underway for a lot of areas right now. What are growers, I'm in Alberta, but in Western Canada in general, what are growers looking at that they might be able to seed to have something green growing through that winter, and maybe even be able to graze in the spring?
So that's where these biennials really come in. I'm a big fan of winter triticale. I really like the plant. I like the palatability. It's very friendly to put into mixes. Winter wheat would be my next choice. Festiolium would be another really good one to play around with if you're not scared of a little more persistence. Not a big fan of fall rye because of the allelopathic properties of it, but if you're in a dry area, just higher risk for overwintering, then that's where the fall rye fits. I would rather have something than nothing. To throw in some sweet clover, to throw in some chicory, some plantain, all of those are the simple cheap ones to be putting in. Even in organic production systems, I suggest to some producers putting down 0.05 pounds of alfalfa in with their crops. So that this way we're only getting, like 1 or 2 per square meter. That's all we need. Now we're changing the game of whether it's compaction, with getting the mycorrhizae going, all of those positives that a perennial will provide. So, if you're looking for doing something this fall, like right now, it's getting to the point where we're running out of frost-free days. So to get some brassicas seeded, this is one of the places I see brassicas being a decent fit. We don't want to go too heavy because the brassicas aren't great for the rumen. We get some graze, get some good protein. We get green, but we always have to watch anytime anything that has good protein in it and it freezes, those cell walls burst and it's going to release nitrates into the plant.
Right.
And so then we have the risk of nitrate poisonings. So the brassicas and the beets are, higher protein. So those are the ones I'm really most concerned about. But if someone was, getting their peas off relatively soon, really cheap way of getting some plants growing that they're going to winter kill and you don't have to worry about next year is oats. I love oats in the fall. Throw some sunflowers in. If we have enough time, throw in a little bit of buckwheat. It will winter kill when you get that one of those first frosts. Annual ryegrass this time of year. Annual ryegrass can become a weed in a hurry if we seed it in the spring. We don't manage it properly, so seed it this time of year. Jack Frost should take care of it before it starts producing seed. So there's quite a few options we can get into. Ideally, if someone had a crop in the ground and had an opportunity to do some grazing, I would be looking at going out the end of July or first part of August and doing an aerial application. Once again, need rain to make it work. But if you get it seeded and growing in August and that 3 weeks before you harvest, we already have 3 weeks of growth. As compared to going out and seeding after harvest, now we're going to take that 5 to 10 days for it to germinate and get out of the ground. We're losing days. So it's always best. Steve Groff has a great quote of, we need to treat our cover crops like our cash crops. We need to have them planted. We need to have, the seed in place. And, it may be that if we can, whether it's a seed can that is in the shade so we keep our seed cool, dark, and dry and mouse free, it's an opportunity. And so on our big operation in Yorkton, we have 1,500 acres, and I would hook onto the air seeder on May 1st, and I would unhook usually in November. So that if there's an opportunity to seed, I was out seeding. Out there.
Yep.
And, if there was, a heavy rain and there was flooding, there's these low spots, go out and seed them. We had some small saline patches. I went out and using cover crops, we were able to, get the salts down and actually get things growing besides kochia and foxtail and all these other salt-loving plants. So it's an opportunity to go out and, address these problems. And then having the animals, now we have a way to justify the monetary, get a return out of taking these biological approaches to fix some of these problems that we have in our soils.
Yeah. Saline issues is another interesting one. I was speaking with Mike Pommier for one of our school episodes, and he was saying that that's the easiest way to fix saline issues is to have something growing in them. Oh. To the point where even if you have to let the weeds grow, you're better off.
Well, and that's exactly it. So when kochia is a growing problem, and as I was driving these Aussies around, we're driving along in the first 100 meters of most fields, there's kochia growing, and they were asking, so why? And I said, well, it's a salt problem, and the roads are changing some of the hydrology, and you get more compaction on the headland, so you get more salt, and basically, whether it's Australia, whether it's Ukraine, the U.S., or Canada, the whole thing with salinity is evaporation. And Jay Fuhr, and was it Dwayne Beck or was it Jay Fuhr who come up for this first, is we have to take the E out of ET. We have to take evaporation from evapotranspiration. When we evaporate water, we're leaving the salts on the surface. When we transpire water, that means the roots are down below the soil surface. They're using the water at depth, and so it's not allowing that water to get to the top to evaporate. So the salts are getting pushed down, and we're reclaiming these saline areas. But we have to remember, if it's saline at any point in time, and we then able to reclaim it, it always has the potential to go back to being saline. So if we go back and allow the evaporation, we're going to have the salinity reappear.
Issues. Well, and it's interesting too because kochia is, from my understanding, actually not that competitive. So if you have other things growing, you're less likely to have kochia issues anyway.
Yep, and you look at kochia, you look at green foxtail barley, those two saline plants. When you read When Weeds Talk, they talk about those areas have low available calcium, and we could have 6 or 8 or 9 or 12,000 pounds of calcium in the soil. But the way our clays are in our soils, because we have 2-to-1 swelling clays, and we have lots of calcium on the outside exchange sites on this clay particle. When we have dry conditions or salinity, and those clay particles are touching each other, now we've decreased the amount of calcium we can get out of that soil.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the kochia and the foxtail barley, they're more efficient in getting that calcium out. So we have low flux calcium in our soil. We have high nitrates, and that's because we're not producing any plants to then use that nitrogen that's being freed up in the soil. And we have high sodium. And so we need to have that taproot going down to have a spot so that when that, whether it's the magnesium or magnesium salt or sodium salt, has a place to get leached out of the soil, we need to bring up some calcium. We need to use up that nitrate. And on our farm, we had a patch of about a 10-acre patch of kochia, and went in with a fairly high rate of tillage radish. And we saw that line. So we did 100 acres of that field because there was a little bit of foxtail barley, a little bit of kochia. So I identified it as being potential just on the edge of the saline. So I seeded down 100 acres of radish there. And 6 years later, you could see the line where we stopped seeding the radish. There was none of those salt-loving things. And then over on the next, it was the odd little plant here and there. So we addressed that next year.
That's incredible. Okay, going back to the fall. It's right here. We like rabbit trails, I think, Kevin.
Yeah. If you follow me, we need GPS.
We do. So with freeze up, we don't know when that's actually going to hit at this point. What would be the benefit of having something established for cattle to graze later, or even carry residue into the spring, even if it's not that high starting off? Like if we can just get something out of the ground, is there a benefit to that?
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Chris Nichols, she's a great resource when we start talking about soil aggregate and soil health. And this is the time of year, as our days are starting to get shorter, the nights are getting cooler. In nature's intelligence, they have the knowledge that this time of year they're going to be taking some of the root exudate that they can get from these plants and use it to weatherproof these soil aggregates, because these soil aggregates are their homes. So what they want to do is have them secured so that this way they will be resilient to our freeze-thaw cycle in our soils. When we do not have something green in the fall, and these plants don't have the root exudates, the biology doesn't have the root exudate to create this weatherproofing, what happens is in the spring, you get the freeze-thaw cycle and these aggregates fall apart. Now the microbes have to restart building their homes. Whereas when we have a green plant growing from here until freeze up, what's going to happen is we're going to have very stable soil aggregates. And this is where, once again, you go, whether you listen to Christine Jones, you talk to Dr. Jamili Zavala, they'll talk about the micro aggregate stability test. And it's really important because if we have these together, they overwinter. Now the microbes already have their established home. They can add on to it. So now they can do an apartment building instead of just having a shack that they have to rebuild. Now they're building onto it. So now we have a bigger, more stable aggregate. Now we're going to get better water infiltration. We're going to be building the fungi in their soil. So our fungal bacteria ratio is going to be going the right direction we want. And if we have critters grazing, guess what? In the spring, if we have something green or stockpiled, we have somewhere to kick those animals out.
That makes sense. And there was, I can't remember, it was quite a few years back that Chris Nichols had, was doing a call out to have growers send pictures
Mm.
of green material growing in like January, February. And there were a lot of people that could go under their snowbanks and actually find green material still growing.
Well, absolutely. And this is where you go out to your front lawn and you take the snow off. What color is the grass underneath?
It's
So
green. It's not brown.
is it cranking out huge amount of root exudates? No, but it's doing something. You go
Right.
out to a canola field that has been harvested and has a full pass of herbicide or tillage and nothing green. There's no life. We're not getting those root exudates. And when we don't have the root exudate, we don't have the building of soil life, the microbes in the soil, we get more nitrate buildup, excess soil nitrate buildup, which
Mm.
then causes all these problems in agriculture. We
Right.
need more complex nitrogen forms in the soil, allow that soil biology use its natural intelligence to to work with instead of work against the system.
And I guess in nature, realistically, you'd find stuff green all the time. You can go out into bushland anywhere and see stuff. So that's a good point. So we're going to wrap up right away here. I know you and I could talk all day, and we have. But if you had one piece of advice for ranchers thinking about seeding covers this fall, what would it be?
Yeah, do something, but keep it relatively cheap. Oats and sunflowers are the two that I like. It's going to add, maybe not the oats, but the sunflower is going to add a little more diversity. They're going to, catch a little more snow, have a little bit of a taproot in there to loosen up those soils. And then for when the snow flies in and they start thinking about next year, this is the time to start thinking about the cover crop for next spring. We need to have that plan in place. We, develop the system, the game plan of, okay, so these are my goals. These are my holes in my grazing system. I need to have more stockpile feed, whether it's in bales or in swath grazing, or we need to develop the plan. We need to look at the system to see what we need to strengthen. Where are we spending the money? And where do you spend money? Well, it's usually feed. Um, Now with the price of cattle, it's going to be, okay, I'm going to expand, so I'm going to go to buy more animals. Okay, that's expensive, but it's the thing that's a limiting factor is the feed. So if we can
Mm.
have that feed system, so have that calendar of the year out and go through and say, okay, so this is my feeding schedule. This is where I'm weak. This is where I need help. These are the quality issues that I'm working with. Uh, those are the things we need to look at. So do something now, and let's start the plan for next year. And we need the plant diversity. We need that system to be in place.
And you mentioned two species there. Now, I think that there's, and maybe I'm just opening up a whole can of worms here, but I feel like there's this. Some people are like, just put one thing in, just put two things in, and then there's the other camp that's like, no, you need a 16 to 20 species mix. So, in the end, what would you recommend to growers? Like, do they need to have all the seeds, or is it better just to start with something?
Something is better than nothing. Two is better than one. Three is better than two. Dr. Christine Jones, she has the magic number of 8. And from what I've seen, 8, and it isn't of, so oats, barley, triticale, durum, and peas. So there's 5. Well, no, those are 4 cool season grasses. So that's just, we have cool season grasses and cool season legumes. So we need the different functional plant groups in there. And this is where, throwing in a little bit of warm season, a little bit of our cool season, throwing the biennials in, working with the grasses, the legumes, the brassica, the non-brassicas, and the forbs, and working within those functional groups. Now we can start adding diversity. We can get some resilience in the system. And it's something where when we once again, you look at this stand and you say, oh, okay, so the legumes, I'm going to do next year, I'm going to do lots of legumes. The environment changes. The soils change. So we need to do a bit of a rotation, and this is where working with Paul Cornelian up at Birch Hills, we've developed a system of putting in some short-term perennials in, doing some biennials, doing some warm season species, and once again just playing around with that triangle of grass, legume, broadleaf, and squeezing it one direction one way, and then the next year, being more legume. After this legume mix, okay, we're going to go in with a higher grass. After that higher grass, maybe go into more of a broadleaf mix, adding that system. And once again, so this way we're not just going to have the one field, we're going to have potentially 3 or 4 different fields into cover crops, so that we're able to do a bit of a rotation and give the opportunity for, we're adding some, so if this is going to be a hay field, we're going to hay it off, then we could do some grazing on it. We're going to have one for rotational grazing. We're going to have a different system, because in the rumen there's 2 sensors, quality and quantity. So that ideally you have that quality sensor go off relatively quick when they're eating high quality feed. Now they're going to fill up on straw. That's a cheap way of feeding cows. When we have low quality feed and that quality sensor never goes off, those animals are going to be out walking and hunting. We never think of a cow as a hunter, but they're hunting for something that they need to match their nutritional requirements. And so if they're doing too much walking, not enough eating or ruminating, then we're not going to get the gains. We're not going to get, we got some issues.
Well, that's terrific, Kevin. Is there somewhere people can go to reach you if they have questions?
Oh,
Absolutely. Contact information?
So the contact information, I've developed the website, www.covercrops.ca, so they can go there. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, under Kevin Elmy. Cover Crops Canada. If you go on YouTube, Cover Crops Canada has a channel there. Haven't updated that one lately, but I should be doing a few more on that. But it's if anybody has any questions or wants to develop a plan, on the Cover Crops Canada website, there's a cover crop assessment sheet, and it's a great way to, because setting goals is tricky. It's intimidating. So if you go to the cover crop assessment sheet, you can look at that, and that is your goals. So that this way, when we're having our discussion, it's going to ask the questions that I'm going to be asking.
That's terrific. Get people thinking ahead of time about it.
Doing the plan.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And that was Kevin Elmy on Ruminating with RealAg.